A few weeks ago, Dr. Kip Davis piggybacked on some recent hype about Dr. Ammon Hillman to clarify some things he said in a previous interview. Dr. Hillman is a scholar in classics, which is to say he spends a lot of time reading ancient Greek literature. I saw the video on the YouTube channel What Your Pastor Didn't Tell You. I've said in another place how I respect Dr. Davis's skills and expertise, but that often I feel like he drives his train of thought parallel to the point he's addressing. If I want to read or listen to someone go on for hours and never make the point they're trying to, I'll just spend more time proofreading my own blog posts. Getting a chance to see the interview/debate/trainwreck, henceforth just called The Thing, that Dr. Davis addressed did give me some possible insight into Dr. Davis, though. The Dr. Davis that was conversing with Dr. Hillman was not the Dr. Davis that I'm used to seeing in other places on the internet. A few months back, Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy pushed back on some things that Dr. Bart Ehrman had said in response to a video Inspiring Philosophy put out years before. Dr. Davis quickly jumped to the defense of all things scholarly and made a big deal about the fact that Michael Jones doesn't read Greek or Hebrew. The thing is, Michael Jones was right, and then when Dr. Ehrman was able to give a more thoughtful, researched response to the same questions in another forum, Dr. Ehrman said so. That kind of represents the Dr. Davis that I'm used to seeing. He doesn't care what you have to say, who you can quote, what evidence you bring to bear. He's here to make sure that everyone stays in their lane. He expects those who don't have a doctorate to defer to those who do in all things, and expects those with doctorates to stay in their fields. To his credit, Dr. Davis doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk. He will be the first one to say something along the lines of, "That's Rabbinic Judaism and I'm more of a Second Temple guy, so take this with a grain of salt," before going on to say things that are absolutely true, nuanced, and well-researched and cited. It's one of many things I respect about Dr. Davis, and why I'm happy to watch content he puts together, particularly when I know someone has him on a leash and will keep him on topic. He's always thoughtful, nuanced, and well-researched, even when he's talking about something a little off topic from his primary areas of study, and when venturing even slightly out of his wheelhouse, he has the humility and self-awareness to acknowledge that there may be more to the question than he's aware of. That's not what Dr. Davis did in The Thing with Dr. Hillman, though. Dr. Hillman was bound and determined to pull some kind of rank on Dr. Davis, which he doesn't have the clout to actually do. Dr. Hillman just wanted everyone to trust him that the Old Testament LXX reads like an original composition rather than a translation. I, as a nobody from nowhere, would not ever put myself in the place of pulling rank on either Dr. Davis or Dr. Hillman. If you're comparing what I say about a text being a translation from Hebrew to Greek to what Dr. Hillman says about it being an original Greek composition, follow the arguments you see. If, for whatever reason, you can't follow the arguments, pick Dr. Hillman. He's done more work in Greek than I have. Similarly, if you're comparing what I say about something being a Greek translation from a Hebrew original to what Dr. Davis says, follow the evidence. If, for some reason, you can't follow the arguments, pick Dr. Davis. He's done more work in Hebrew and Greek than I have. When comparing the work of Dr. Davis and Dr. Hillman, I would follow Dr. Davis on the textual history of the Bible if I couldn't follow the evidence. He's spent more time there. During The Thing with Dr. Hillman, Dr. Davis tried for as long as was prudent to uphold a sense of, we're all equals here. Everyone's opinion is equally valid. It's hard to keep up that attitude when someone is trying to pull rank on you. I can say from experience, it's hard even when the other person really does have the clout to pull rank. More on that later. I can only imagine how difficult it would be when you're the one with the relevant degrees and experience, and the other person is spouting nonsense from a field that's only tangentially related. I can see a few interactions like this resulting in an attitude adjustment that would look from the outside like circling the wagons around silos of scholarship. I have had a few interactions through Facebook, Reddit, and snail mail with scholars about a few of my non-standard takes on text and theology. There are some people that have gone deep with me, and then disappear when I turn out to be better informed than they initially thought. That's always frustrating because I don't know what objection they bring that could actually fix the problems I'm having. Then there are those that take the attitude that unless I have a degree, they don't have time to engage with me. I get that. I have to budget my time too. Even as a nobody from nowhere, I occasionally get messages from people that obviously haven't thought through all the implications of what they're saying. I have to budget my time and limit how far I'll let those conversations spiral. One way that some people limit these interactions is to only engage when someone has a particular level of education. No filter for these kinds of things is perfect, but at least when someone limits their interactions to particular education levels, I know why and I can respect their reasons. Other scholars have told me that I should seek to get published, that they wouldn't change their mind based on any blog post, but that if these kinds of arguments showed up in a relevant scholarly article, they would need to think harder about it. Again, I get and respect that. I have changed my views based on what I've read on a blog or a Facebook post from a non-scholar a few times. Then again, it would be kinda hypocritical of me not to. I definitely have a lower barrier of persuasion when I know something has already passed peer review, though. I think it's perfectly reasonable to set that as a minimum standard before being convinced of something. However, in listening to Dr. Davis and his colleagues going on through this discussion, I couldn't help but feel like I've been on Dr. Davis's side of a very similar discussion too many times. There is a certain kind of scholar that has taken the attitude that since I'm a nobody from nowhere, and they're a scholar with a master's or doctorate degree, I'm automatically wrong and they're automatically right, no matter what evidence I bring. I've shown them places where I think my point about the original language of a document shines through, and they cannot provide any reason why the scholarly majority should be preferred. Even so, they tell me that the inability to identify the original language I point out is irrelevant simply because I lack a degree. That kind of goes to work against one part of what Dr. Davis is trying to say. Dr. Davis is trying to say that it's always easy to tell when you look at a document in two languages which is the original. My conversations with people about Hebrew Matthew would strongly suggest that this is not always the case. As I've pulled together the evidence that Matthew was written in Hebrew, I've been willing to talk to just about anyone that has constructive feedback for me. I recognize that my whole document with the evidence is a lot, so I'll engage with people that haven't read it. One of the things that I'll get periodically is that experts can just tell when they read the Hebrew and Greek side by side which is original. Occasionally, I'll even get pointed to a particular passage that reads well in the Greek, like the alliteration in the Beatitudes or the wordplay on Peter's name at Caesarea Philippi. When these people know enough Greek and Hebrew to compare them side by side, though, every single time I've replied with corresponding passage in both Hebrew and Greek, I get told, "Actually, you're right. That could go either way." Then I'll point out the poetic nature of the parable of sheep and goats in Hebrew and the chiastic wordplay in Matthew 12 verses 14 to 16 between proshim and pirsem, and the apparent assimilation in the Greek at the beginning of Matthew chapter 10 or Matthew 3 verse 11. When people look at those, they come to agree that the Hebrew looks like it could be original. It has long been noted in scholarship that both Matthew and Mark read like translation Greek. Semitisms abound. Mark includes a number of Aramaic phrases that are instantly translated to Greek. If we didn't have such strong, stable traditions that Mark was written in Greek, the Aramaic primicists, particularly on Mark, would be building a much stronger case. Now I want to turn our attention to something else entirely. Who is to say that the third chapter of Daniel wasn't originally written in Greek? To be clear, I'm far less certain about anything I lay out in the next 4 paragraphs than what I say about Matthew and Mark. This is offered as a counterexample to the claim that it's easy to tell what the original language of a given text is. I happen to believe that the third chapter of Daniel was written in Greek, but note that my entire case for that is laid out in 4 paragraphs on a tangent for another topic. Don't go looking for a more robust version of this argument. There isn't one, and as such, tread carefully if you plan to follow my conclusions there. but as a case study where either the Aramaic or the Greek read as though original, the third chapter of Daniel is an interesting piece. The first thing to note in that regard is that Daniel is not a single composition. Almost every chapter of Daniel is a separate document. In the Hebrew/Aramaic version of Daniel, there are 12 chapters, and these are between 9 and 11 separate documents stitched together. There are a few cases where it's debatable whether they are separate documents or not. Of these, we know for sure that some were written in Hebrew and some were written in Aramaic. Outside of religious commitments, there's no reason in theory that one could not also have been written in Greek. Strengthening this, there are Greek loanwords in the Aramaic, but only in the third chapter of Daniel. There are no other Greek loanwords in the entire text of Daniel. These words are from
Kyrix, Karos,
from
Συμφωνία,
Symponia,
from
Ψαλτήριον,
Psanterin,
from
Κύθαρης,
Kytaros,
from
Σαμβίκη,
Sabcha.
These are all the names of musical instruments, but it's interesting that nowhere else in the entire Hebrew Bible do any Greek loanwords appear. In the Greek edition of Daniel 3, a long prayer is added from the three who are thrown into the furnace. While the text of this section is written to match the Semitic style of the rest of Daniel, no Aramaic copies of this exist. However, in the Greek, the text simply flows together. To me, it looks like the Aramaic translator just didn't feel that it added anything to have a poetry jam session in the furnace and cut it for length. The same Semitic style can be seen in the Greek addition to Daniel about Susanna, but in the case of Susanna we can be more certain that the original language is Greek due to some Greek wordplays that don't translate well into Aramaic. Altogether, I think that helps to show that the original language of Daniel 3 is much harder to pin down than some people say it is. Certainly, the tradition is that the entire book of Daniel was written in Hebrew and Aramaic. But then again, if we're following tradition, then the tradition is also that Matthew was written in Hebrew. There are times when it is obvious which is original. One of the things that has kept me from joining the Hebrew New Testament position is how obvious it is that the Gospel of John was written in Greek. Every indicator that I list for Matthew being written in Hebrew could be replicated for John in Greek. Luke definitely leans that direction as well. Mark has been noted above for how much translation Greek, to borrow the term from Dr. Davis, it uses, but in total the evidence supports that our oldest versions of Mark in languages other than Greek derive from the Greek version we have. Matthew alone among the Gospels stands as a candidate for a Semitic original, and when we compare the Hebrew edition of Matthew against the Greek edition, it is the Greek that looks to me like a translation. So the question is, if you're still convinced that Matthew was originally written in Greek, where is the passage that when you compare the Hebrew and Greek editions side by side, it's obvious that the Greek is original, and why?